The West does not measure a person by the color of their skin or the god they worship, but by the courage in their heart and the truth of their word. The twisted metal of the locomotive hissed under the unforgiving sun. Finn and his iron wolves celebrated, their saddlebags heavy with the railroad's gold. Akachitu stood apart, his share of the loot feeling like a stone in his gut. This was not the justice he sought. He turned to face Finn, his voice low. "This is not our agreement. You said we would hurt the company, not rob passengers." Finn laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "Plans change." He raised his firearm. The blast echoed across the plains. Akachetu fell, the world turning to a blur of dust and betrayal. Finn mounted his horse, not even looking back at the man he left to die beside the iron tracks that had stolen his land. Lillian traced the rim of a cold teacup, the silence of her small homestead a constant reminder of her loss. Outside, the wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying the faint, sharp scent of steam and gunpowder. Another train, another tragedy. Her husband, a good man, an engineer full of dreams about connecting the country, had been killed during a raid just like this one. The railroad company had offered condolences and a small pension. It felt like an insult. She hated the violence, hated the outlaws who saw progress as a prize to be stolen. She closed her eyes, the image of her husband's kind face a painful memory. The world felt empty, filled only with dust and grief. Drawn by a morbid curiosity, Lillian walked toward the wreckage. The train stood silent, a wounded beast. Passengers huddled together, their faces pale with shock. Then she saw him, away from the others, half hidden in the scrub brush. A native warrior, his clothes torn, a dark stain spreading across his side. Her first instinct was fear, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. He was one of them, a savage, a killer. She should walk away, go back to her empty house and bolt the door. But his breathing was shallow, his face etched with pain, not malice. He was not a monster. He was a dying man. Her heart, a thing she thought had hardened into stone, felt a flicker of pity. Her body ached as she dragged him away from the tracks, away from prying eyes. Every step was a battle against her fear and the heavy weight of his unconscious form. She got him inside her small cabin, the scent of sage and his blood filling the air. She laid him on the cot, his dark hair stark against the white linen. For a moment, she stood over him, a rifle in her hand. This was madness. She was sheltering the very kind of man who had made her a widow, but as she looked at his face, she saw not a villain, but a victim. She put the rifle down and went to fetch water and bandages. She would save him. Why, she did not know. It was a choice made in the heart, not the head. He awoke with a gasp, his eyes wide with confusion and hostility. He tried to rise, but a sharp pain in his side forced him back down. He saw her then, a woman with sorrow in her eyes, standing in the dim light of the cabin. He did not recognize her. His memory was a fog of smoke and betrayal. She approached slowly, holding a dipper of water. "You are safe here," she said, her voice soft but steady. He stared at her, his hand instinctively going to where his knife should be. It was gone. He was weak, defenseless. He watched her every move, a cornered animal ready to fight, even if it was his last act on this earth. He did not trust her kindness. The fever took him for 3 days. He drifted in and out of consciousness, lost in nightmares of fire and broken promises. In his brief moments of clarity, he saw her. She was always there, bathing his brow with a cool cloth, forcing broth between his lips. She moved with a quiet efficiency, her presence a calming balm in his storm of pain. She found a small, smooth carving of a hawk in his medicine pouch and placed it on the table beside his bed. In his delirium, he saw not the face of an enemy, but the gentle hands of a healer. The lines of hatred in his heart began to soften. She was saving his life, and he did not understand why. On the 4th day, the fever broke. His mind was clear. He sat up, the pain a dull ache now. She was sitting by the window, mending a dress. "Why?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. She turned. her expression unreadable. "Why did you help me?" Lillian looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time. He was younger than she had thought. His eyes held a deep sadness she recognized. "I do not know," she answered honestly. "I saw a man who needed help. That is all." He did not believe it was that simple. People in this land did not help his kind. There was always a reason, a price. He remained silent, watching her, waiting for the truth. "My husband was an engineer," Lillian said, her voice barely a whisper. "He was killed a year ago. Robbers derailed his train." She looked at Akachetu, her gaze direct. "I hate the men who did it. I hate all of them." Akachetu felt a strange twist in his chest. He was one of those men, yet she had saved him. "The Iron Road takes many things," he said quietly. "Lives, land." She nodded slowly, a silent understanding passing between them. They were two sides of the same tragedy, brought together by violence and loss. In that shared moment of grief, the first fragile thread of trust was woven between them. It was a small beginning in a world full of endings. Akachetu moved around the small cabin, his strength returning with each passing day. He examined the room, a place so different from his own world. Books lined a shelf, their pages filled with words he could not read. On a large table, intricate drawings of gears and levers lay under a thin sheet of dust. Her husband's work. He picked up a small metal cog, its teeth perfectly measured. He saw the care and precision in it. This was the work of a builder, not a destroyer. He felt a pang of something he could not name. He was a warrior, meant to protect his people. But his path had become tangled with men who only knew how to break things. Lillian watched him, her curiosity growing. He was quiet, observant. His presence filled the small cabin, yet it was not an unwelcome feeling. One evening as the sun set, casting long shadows across the floor, she found the courage to ask. "The robbery," she began, her voice hesitant. "Why were you with them? You are not like them." Akachetu looked out the window at the endless plains, the land that had once belonged to his ancestors. For a long time, he said nothing. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions. He seemed to be weighing his words, deciding if she could be trusted with the burden of his truth. "They promised me revenge," Akachetu finally said, his voice low and heavy with pain. He told her of the treaty, the paper promise that the railroad men had made to his people. They had promised to share the land, to live in peace. But they had lied. They took the best hunting grounds, scared away the buffalo, and fenced in the water. His people were starving. "I did not want their gold," he said, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "I wanted to stop the iron beast. I wanted to make them pay for their lies." He had joined the Iron Wolves, believing they shared his cause, a fool's hope in a world run by greed. Lillian listened, and the world she thought she knew shifted on its axis. Her husband had believed in the railroad. He saw it as a symbol of progress, a way to build a better future. But she was now hearing the other side of the story, a tale of broken promises and profound loss. The simple lines of good and evil she had drawn in her mind began to blur. The railroad was not just a marvel of engineering. It was a weapon that had destroyed a way of life. She looked at Akachetu, at the pain and dignity in his face, and her heart ached with a new, more complex sorrow. She was no longer sure who the real heathens were. The saloon was thick with smoke and the smell of cheap whiskey. Finn threw a gold coin on the bar. "Another bottle," he growled. His men were loud and drunk, but Finn was sober, his mind sharp and uneasy. Akachetu should be dead. He had made sure of it. But a scout had just ridden in with news. A woman living alone out by the old trestle bridge had been seen buying extra supplies. More importantly, the doctor in the next town had treated a ranch hand who spoke of finding a wounded native near the train wreck. The man had vanished before the sheriff arrived. Finn's fingers tightened around his glass. A witness was a loose thread that could unravel everything. Finn gathered his most trusted men. "The Cheyenne whelp is alive," he said, his voice a low snarl. "Some woman is hiding him." He saw the looks on their faces. They had left Akachetu for dead on his orders. "He turned on us. He was going to betray us to the law." It was a lie, but it was a necessary one. Fear was a better motivator than loyalty. That savage knows too much. If he talks, we all hang. He described Lillian's homestead, a lone cabin in the middle of nowhere. We ride out at dawn, we find him, and we finish the job. He would silence Akachetu and the woman both. No witnesses. No loose ends. The horses' hooves kicked up clouds of dust as Finn and his men rode east. The sun beat down on them, relentless and hot. Finn felt a grim satisfaction. He enjoyed the hunt. He thought about the deal he had with the railroad executive, a man in a fancy suit who paid him handsomely to stage these robberies. The insurance money was a river of gold, and Finn was growing rich. Akachetu was a complication, a piece of his past he thought he had buried. The warrior had been useful for a time, his knowledge of the land invaluable. But he had a conscience. And in their line of work, a conscience was a fatal liability. Back in the quiet of the cabin, a tentative peace had settled. Akachetu was teaching Lillian a few words in his language. He pointed to the sky. "Mapia," he said. She repeated the word, her pronunciation clumsy but earnest. He smiled, a rare and genuine expression that transformed his face. It was a simple moment, a small island of tranquility in a sea of turmoil. They were from different worlds, their lives set on a collision course by forces beyond their control. Yet in this small shared space, they were not enemies. They were just a man and a woman, finding a flicker of light in the darkness. Akachetu stood at the door of the cabin, his body tense. The wind carried more than just the scent of sagebrush. It carried a warning. He had been a warrior his whole life, and his senses were sharp. He scanned the horizon, his eyes missing nothing. He then knelt and examined the ground around the cabin. He saw the faint impression of a horseshoe, not from Lillian's mule. It was fresh. Someone had been watching them. "We are not alone," he said, his voice grim as he came back inside. "Someone is out there." He knew with a cold certainty that Finn had found him. The hunt was not over. It had just reached their doorstep. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Lillian. "The sheriff," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We have to go to town and get the sheriff." Akachetu shook his head. "The law in this territory is owned by the railroad. They will not believe a native against a white man. They will see me as one of the robbers. They will put me in a cage or worse." He was right, and she knew it. There would be no justice for him, not in a town built on the land taken from his people. They were on their own. The safety of her small home had become an illusion. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a trap. They had to prepare. There was no other choice. Lillian took out her husband's old hunting rifle. It was heavy and unfamiliar in her hands. Akachetu took it from her gently. He checked the mechanism, his movements sure and practiced. "You must aim steady," he instructed, his voice calm. "Breathe out as you press the trigger." He showed her how to load it, how to sight down the barrel. She listened, her fear slowly giving way to a cold resolve. She had lost one husband to men like Finn. She would not lose another person she cared for. Not without a fight. She would stand her ground. This was her home. As the afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, they saw them, 3 riders, silhouetted against the blood-red sky on a distant ridge. They were not moving, just watching, waiting. The peaceful quiet of the plains was gone, replaced by a heavy, suffocating tension. Every gust of wind sounded like an approaching footstep. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Akachetu stood by the window, the rifle in his hands. Lillian stood beside him, her own weapon held tight. They did not speak. There was nothing left to say. The time for words was over. The time for survival had begun. The first shot shattered the evening calm, splintering the wood of the window frame. Lillian flinched but held her ground. Akachetu returned fire, not wildly, but with a calm, deadly precision. He was not just shooting, he was making every bullet count. "Stay low," he commanded, his voice a steady presence in the chaos. "Do not show yourself at the window." They moved through the small cabin like a well-rehearsed team, a strange dance of survival. He would fire, then move, drawing their attention while she watched from another angle, her eyes scanning the growing darkness for any sign of movement. Akachetu's skill was breathtaking. He moved with a fluid grace, a warrior in his element. He seemed to know where the attackers would be before they even appeared. He was a protector, a guardian. Lillian, huddled behind an overturned table, felt a surge of admiration mixed with her fear. She was no warrior, but she would not be helpless. She loaded the rifles, her hands steady despite the thunder of gunfire outside. When one of the bandits tried to sneak toward the back of the cabin, she raised her rifle, took a deep breath as Akachetu had taught her, and fired. A cry of pain from the darkness told her she had not missed. A voice boomed from the night, dripping with menace. It was Finn. "Give us the heathen, lady. We have no quarrel with you. Just send him out, and we will be on our way." Lillian's heart pounded in her chest. She looked at Akachetu. His face was a mask of stone. She crawled to the window and shouted back, her voice ringing with a strength she did not know she possessed. "There are no heathens here, only a man you left to die. Go away or you will be the ones who die tonight." A moment of stunned silence followed. Then a fresh volley of bullets slammed into the cabin walls. The assault was relentless. For what felt like hours they fought back, a desperate defense against a determined foe. A bullet grazed Akachetu's arm, a hot line of pain. He grunted but did not falter. They managed to wound another of Finn's men, and the attack subsided, the bandits pulling back to regroup. A temporary quiet fell over the homestead. They knew it would not last. They were low on ammunition, and the cabin could not withstand another sustained attack. They were trapped. As Lillian bandaged Akachetu's arm, their eyes met. In the dim lamplight, they saw a shared desperation and something more, a bond forged in fire. In the fragile quiet, Lillian gently cleaned and bandaged the new wound on Akachetu's arm. The small cabin was a mess of splintered wood and broken glass. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder. Her touch was gentle, her focus absolute. He watched her, his expression unreadable in the flickering lamplight. When she was finished, he reached out and covered her hand with his. It was not a gesture of passion, but of profound gratitude. "You fight like a Cheyenne woman," he said softly. It was the highest compliment he could give. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she had thought long buried. "There is something you must know," Akachetu said, his voice low and urgent. "About Finn." He told her what he had learned just before the robbery, the reason Finn had tried to kill him. He had overheard Finn meeting with a well-dressed man from the east, a railroad executive. "The robberies are a lie," Akachetu explained. "The company pays Finn to rob its own trains. Then the company collects the insurance money. They profit from their own disasters." He had planned to expose them, but Finn had silenced him first. Or so he had thought. Lillian stared at him, her mind reeling. The company her husband had given his life for, the company that had sent her a meaningless letter of condolence, was responsible for his death. It was not just a random act of violence. It was a calculated business decision. The grief she had carried for a year curdled into a cold, hard rage. All this time, she had hated the outlaws, the faceless villains. But the real monster was a man in a suit, a man who signed papers and counted his money while others died. Her sorrow was replaced by a burning desire for justice, true justice. Her eyes fell upon her husband's work table, the maps and schematics of the rail lines he had so lovingly drawn. An idea, desperate and dangerous, began to form in her mind. She unrolled a large map showing the entire region. Her finger traced a line, past the main tracks, to a small, forgotten spur. "Here," she whispered, her voice filled with a new, steely purpose. "The old Red Creek switching station. It was abandoned years ago. The track leads to a collapsed tunnel." She looked at Akachetu, her eyes gleaming in the lamplight. "I know how to work the switch. We can trap them." They moved under the cloak of a moonless night. Lillian left a single lamp burning in the window, a small deception to buy them time. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every snap of a twig sounded like a gunshot. Akachetu led the way, his steps silent on the hard, dry earth. He moved with an innate knowledge of the land, avoiding open spaces and keeping to the deep shadows of the rock formations. Lillian followed close behind, her husband's rifle in one hand and the precious map in the other. She put her trust in him completely, her fear a cold knot in her stomach, but her resolve as hard as iron. They followed the path of the iron tracks, a cold, dark scar across the land. Lillian's knowledge of the railway guided their route, while Akachetu's senses kept them safe. He would stop suddenly, holding up a hand for silence, listening to the night sounds. She learned to read his posture, to know when he sensed danger. They were a strange pair, the engineer's widow and the Cheyenne warrior, united by a common enemy and a desperate hope for survival. Their two worlds, once so far apart, had merged into this single, dangerous path in the darkness. Suddenly, Akachetu pulled her down behind a cluster of boulders. He put a finger to his lips. Lillian held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sound of hoofbeats, slow and steady, grew closer. A patrol. Two of Finn's men, their dark shapes passing less than 20 feet from their hiding place. They were so close Lillian could smell the sweat of their horses. She and Akachetu were pressed together in the narrow space, his arm a protective barrier around her. She could feel the steady beat of his heart, a calm rhythm in the terrifying silence. The riders passed, and the night was quiet once more. After what felt like an eternity, they saw it. The skeletal frame of a water tower against the star-dusted sky. The Red Creek switching station. It was a ghost of a place. The buildings dark and dilapidated, the air heavy with the scent of rust and decay. A siding track split off from the main line, disappearing into the blackness of a collapsed tunnel entrance. This was it. This was their last chance. They found shelter in the old station master's office, the windows like vacant eyes staring out into the darkness. Here, they would make their stand. Here, they would set their trap. At dawn, Finn and his men stormed the cabin. They found it empty, the lamp guttering its last flame. A cold rage filled Finn as he realized he had been tricked. On the floor lay a single piece of paper, a map. He snatched it up. His eyes narrowed as he saw the circled location, the Red Creek station. "He is running," one of his men said. "No," Finn snarled, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "He is not running. He is choosing his own burial ground." He did not care why they had gone there. He only cared that he knew where they were. He would ride them down and end this once and for all. Inside the dusty station office, Lillian explained the final details of her plan. "The switch is old and rusted," she said, pointing out the window at the heavy iron lever. "It will take all my strength to move it. You have to keep them busy. Keep them away from me until I can throw it." Akachetu nodded, his face serious. He understood. Her role was just as dangerous as his. He looked around the derelict yard, planning his positions, calculating the angles of fire. He had to give her the time she needed. Her life, and his, depended on it. They made their preparations as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Akachetu found a defensible position in the loft of an old barn, giving him a clear view of the yard. He checked his rifle and ammunition, his movements economical and precise. Lillian went to the switch lever. It was as bad as she had feared, frozen with rust. She used oil from a forgotten lantern and a heavy iron bar to slowly, painfully, work it loose. Her hands were scraped and bleeding, but she did not stop. She thought of her husband, of Akachetu, of the justice they both deserved. The pain was nothing compared to the fire in her soul. Akachetu saw at first a rising cloud of dust on the eastern horizon. "They are coming," he called down to her. Lillian gave the lever one last, desperate shove. It moved, just a few inches, with a loud groan of protesting metal. It would have to be enough. She ran back to the station office, her heart pounding. The final confrontation was here. Akachetu looked down from the loft, his eyes finding hers. He gave her a slight nod, a silent promise. "We will face this together." She nodded back, her fear replaced by a strange, calm certainty. They would win, or they would die here, Under the wide, empty sky, the iron wolves thundered into the station yard, their horses kicking up plumes of dust. They fanned out, their eyes scanning the silent, empty buildings. It felt like a trap. Finn reined in his horse, his hand on his weapon. "Find them!" he roared. At that moment, a shot rang out from the barn loft. One of the bandits cried out and fell from his saddle. Chaos erupted. The gang scrambled for cover, firing wildly at the barn. Akachetu had made his move, drawing their full attention, becoming the sole target of their rage. He was the diversion. While the yard was a storm of gunfire, Lillian ran from the station office. She kept low, using an old, rusted freight car for cover as she sprinted toward the switch lever. Bullets whizzed past her, striking sparks off the metal. She ignored them. Her entire world narrowed to that single iron handle. The fate of their lives, the chance for justice, it all came down to this. She reached the lever, her hands raw, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She put her shoulder into it, pushing with every ounce of strength she possessed. It did not budge. From the loft, Akachetu saw her struggle. He also saw Finn, regrouping his men for a charge directly toward the barn. They would overwhelm him in moments. He fired his last few shots carefully, trying to slow them down, to buy her a few more precious seconds. Lillian closed her eyes, summoning the image of her husband's face, of Akacheti's quiet strength. With a final, desperate cry, she threw her entire body against the lever. There was a deafening screech of metal on metal, and the heavy iron bar slammed into place. The switch was thrown. Finn and his men charged forward, their horses at a full gallop. They did not see the subtle shift in the tracks ahead. Their path was no longer straight. The rails now curved sharply toward the dark, gaping maw of the collapsed tunnel. They realized their mistake too late. The lead horses screamed as they were diverted, unable to stop their momentum. Men and animals crashed into the rockfall in a terrible tangle of destruction. The dust settled, revealing a scene of utter ruin. Finn was defeated. In the sudden, ringing silence, Akachetu climbed down from the loft. He and Lillian stood together, watching the end of the iron wolves. They were bruised and exhausted, but they were free. A new, uncertain future stretched out before them, a future they would face together.